7:52 a.m. Jefferson County Courthouse, Baton Rouge, Georgia. The sun hadn't even finished its climb, but the heat had already settled in. Thick, clinging, unapologetic. The courthouse stood like a relic of another century. All gray stone, sharp edges, and too many secrets pressed between its pillars. Judge Maya Reynolds pulled into the reserved parking space with the precision of someone used to being watched. She cut the engine, the hum of the tires fading into an uneasy silence. 10 minutes. 10 minutes until the court was in session. Today wasn't just another trial. It was the trial, the one that would either challenge or quietly uphold decades of racial profiling across Jefferson County. The state had eyes on it. The media had cameras on it, and Maya had every ounce of herself prepared for it. She opened the door, slung her judicial robe over one arm, and stepped out in pressed navy slacks and a cream blouse. Elegant, understated, exact. Her heels clicked against the asphalt, each step measured. She didn't head for the main entrance. That was where the circus had set up. Reporters clustering like vultures, microphones blooming like weeds. She turned toward the side entrance, quiet, efficient, dignified. Then she saw him, white male. Early 30s, buzz cut, aviators. Badge, C, Hearst, posture, problem. He was standing just off the entryway, arms crossed, jaw tight, already watching her approach like she didn't belong. Maya slowed her stride, not out of fear. Out of calculation. She reached for her badge, the one clipped to her lanyard, plain as day. "Good morning," she said, with the practiced calm of someone who'd spent years surviving rooms full of men who didn't want her there. "Judge Maya Reynolds, I'm presiding today." The badge caught the sunlight, but Officer Colin Hearst didn't look at it. Not really. He looked at her, and that's all it took. "I need to see some ID," he said, his voice clipped and authority-laced. Maya blinked, then lifted the badge higher. "You're holding me up, officer. The courtroom opens in less than 10 minutes. "There's been a reported incident nearby," he interrupted, his tone sharper now. "You match the description." She didn't flinch. There it was, the phrase, "You match the description." "The universal code for you're black and you're here." Her hands stayed visible. Her stance didn't shift. But inside, something tensed. "I'm a judge," she said again, slower this time, the edge of warning cutting through her restraint. "I don't have time for this." But Hearst was already stepping closer, thumb grazing the strap of his belt, too near the cuffs. "I don't care who you say you are," he said. "You're going to need to come with me for questioning." That was the moment. The line between protocol and profiling. Between authority and abuse. Maya didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead, because pleading was a trap. It suggested you were guilty. And she'd worked too damn hard for too damn long to give that impression to anyone. Then, cutting through the rising tension like a siren, "Colin, what the hell are you doing?" A second officer approached. Older. Black, real authority in his walk. His eyes went wide the second he recognized her. "Judge Reynolds?" She nodded once. Tight, controlled. The older officer snapped to Colin. "Stand down, now." "She matches." "She's the presiding judge, you idiot. You really want internal affairs all over your ass today?" Colin took a single step back. But the damage had already taken root. His hand hovered just long enough. His tone had twisted just enough. And his assumption, his refusal to even look at the badge, spoke louder than any siren. Maya inhaled, shallow. Controlled. "I'm fine," she said, though she wasn't speaking to him. "Not really." She turned, walked through the side door. never once looking back. The hallway inside was cool and familiar. Tile floors, fluorescent lights, quiet echoes. But her pulse was still pounding, and her stomach had gone tight with something too familiar to name. She had been profiled. Again, but this time it wasn't in a grocery store, it wasn't on a dark street. It was here, at the courthouse. In the morning, she was scheduled to oversee a case related to racial profiling. You can't make this up. But that's the point. In America, you don't have to. There were two kinds of silence in a courthouse. The first was respectful, the kind that wrapped around you like a judge's robe, deliberate and ceremonial. The second was suffocating, the kind that made your skin itch and your breath shallow, the kind that followed you, not because of what you said, but because of who you were. Judge Maya Reynolds had learned to live with both. She sat behind the bench now, her hands folded calmly, eyes scanning the docket in front of her. But her mind was still at the side entrance, at the weight of that officer's stare, the casual tilt of his authority. The badge she had held in front of him may as well have been invisible, but Maya didn't let it show. She never did. From the moment she'd stepped into her first law classroom at Spelman, she knew her presence came with a price. Professors had questioned her GPA twice. Intern coordinators had mistaken her for administrative staff. And in her first year as a circuit judge, a defense attorney once called her Miss and demanded to speak to the real judge. She had grown calloused, not cold, but carved. Hardened where it mattered. This wasn't new, this wasn't surprising. But it was personal. Because the man on trial today, Kevin Bryant, could have been her brother, her cousin, her son. Case number 27046, the state of Georgia versus Kevin Bryant. Charge: obstruction of justice. Underlying cause: none. 19 years old. Arrested 3 blocks from his front porch. The officer said he looked suspicious, loitering near a community mailbox, glancing around, holding his phone too long. Kevin had been waiting for his lift. He had no warrants, no priors, no complaints. He was polite and cooperative, and still, they cuffed him, threw him to the ground, left scrapes on his face that still hadn't healed. The police report was less than a paragraph, but Maya had read it 5 times. Not because it was complex, but because it was familiar. The pattern: suspicion first, justification later. The badge came with assumptions, but so did the melanin. A knock at her chamber door pulled her back to the present. Her clerk, Emily, nervous as always, poked her head in. "They're ready to begin, Judge." Maya nodded once. "Bring them in." As the courtroom filled, Maya adjusted the robe over her shoulders. The thick black fabric always felt heavier on days like this, as if it too understood the weight of expectation. She scanned the room. Defense to the left. Kevin and his attorney, a woman named Trina Caldwell, sharp-eyed, firm-jawed. Prosecution to the right. Assistant DA Marcus Reed, Ivy League, camera-friendly, already rehearsing his lines. And directly in front of her, the jury. 12 faces, mostly white, mostly middle-aged, one man already dozing off. This was the playing field. This was America. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. The Honorable Judge Maya Reynolds presiding. She gavelled once. The room stilled. Maya looked down at the file again, but this time she wasn't reading it. She was remembering. A hallway in college. A senior professor, white, male, once told her, "You're articulate for your background." At the time she had smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was safer. That's what survival looked like back then. Back here, it looked like objectivity. Impartiality. A perfect mask. "Opening statements," she said, her voice calm, even. The attorneys rose. The trial began, but Maya's gaze kept drifting to Kevin. He sat perfectly still. Hands clasped, shoulders straight, his tie is too tight. His haircut is too recent, a mother's touch. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a young man trying not to breathe too loudly in a room that had already decided who he was. And as the prosecution started painting him as uncooperative, Maya saw Kevin's jaw tighten. She recognized that too, that subtle restraint. That need to not explode, not because you weren't angry, but because you couldn't afford to be. The word obstruction floated across the room like an accusation dressed in legalese. Obstruction. It was as if Kevin's very presence in his own neighborhood was somehow obstructing the peace. Maya's fingers curled against her bench. Just slightly. This wasn't just a case. It was a mirror, and the reflection was exhausting. But Maya didn't flinch, didn't sigh, didn't let her posture falter. Because that's what they waited for. The slip. The crack. The moment they could say, she let it get personal. She already knew what they whispered when she wasn't in the room. She's emotional. She's biased. She's got an agenda. And maybe she did. Her agenda was called accountability. Her bias was called truth. And her emotion? It was called history. It should have been a normal entrance. A swipe of the badge, a nod from security, a quiet walk down the marble hallway to Courtroom 3B. Instead, Judge Maya Reynolds was standing outside the side entrance of the Jefferson County Courthouse, facing down the barrel of something far more insidious than a weapon: disbelief. And that disbelief was wearing a uniform. Officer Colin Hurst's eyes hadn't moved since she identified herself. They stayed locked on her, not on her credentials, not on the badge clipped neatly to her blazer, but on her skin, her presence, her confidence, the kind of confidence that made men like him suspicious. "I don't care who you say you are," Hurst said, stepping closer. The words came out flat, clipped, like a warning disguised as procedure. His right hand hovered near the cuffs on his belt, fingers tapping with nervous control. Maya stood her ground. Still, calm. But inside, a familiar heat was rising, not from fear, but from insult. "I've identified myself," she replied evenly. "I've shown you my credentials. You're obstructing a sitting judge from entering a courthouse where she is scheduled to preside." Hurst's eyes narrowed. "That's not my concern right now." Not my concern. 3 words that stripped her robe, her degrees, her office, and left her standing there as just another suspect. "I need you to step to the side," he continued. "We have an active situation in the area, and you match the description." Her tone didn't waver, but her pulse had begun to race. "I've matched that description my entire life," she said quietly. Still, she didn't move. Didn't reach, didn't argue, she knew better. Because arguing could turn into resisting, and resisting could turn into headlines, even when you were the judge. Especially when you were the judge. Hurst didn't flinch. His hand inched closer. And for one harrowing second, Maya saw it, saw herself bent over the hood of her own car, arms twisted behind her back, mugshot on local news, black woman detained outside courthouse. Investigation pending. It wouldn't matter that she was innocent. It wouldn't matter that she was the system. Because at that moment, all anyone could see was that she was black. Then, "Officer Hurst, step back." The voice cut through the air like a crack of thunder. Both of them turned. A second officer was approaching from the parking lot. Senior. Black. Authority radiating from his stride like heat from the asphalt. Sergeant Marcus Bell. His badge caught the sunlight, but what caught Maya more was the look on his face. recognition, disbelief, and beneath it, barely contained fury. "Judge Reynolds," he said, nodding with tight respect. "My apologies." Hurst froze. "Wait, she's the presiding judge for the Daniels trial this morning," Bell snapped. "You just tried to detain the damn judge." "I didn't know." "You didn't look," Bell said, voice rising just enough. "That's the problem, officer. You never looked." Maya remained silent, not because she had nothing to say, but because her silence was louder. Hurst looked at her now, really looked, and something in his posture shifted, a flicker of shame. Maybe just confusion that the world didn't operate on his assumptions anymore. "Judge, are you all right?" Bell asked. Maya's jaw was set. Her eyes are cold. "I'm late," she replied, stepping past them both. She didn't wait for an apology. She didn't want one, because apologies didn't stop humiliation. Apologies, I didn't erase what could have happened in just one more second of ego. As the door closed behind her and she stepped into the quiet hum of the courthouse hallway, she exhaled. Slow, measured. She had been profiled. She had been disrespected. She had nearly been cuffed outside her own courtroom, and still, she had to walk into that courtroom and deliver justice. She had to look impartial. Speak evenly, pretend none of this mattered, but it did matter. Because the boy on trial inside, Kevin Bryant, had gone through the same thing, only he didn't have a badge, or a robe. Or Sergeant Marcus Bell, all Kevin had was the truth, and that wasn't always enough. Maya's heels echoed against the tile floor as she approached the double doors of Courtroom 3B. Inside, a young man would sit waiting to be heard. Outside, a man in uniform had nearly silenced her. And that was the real conflict, not just between a judge and a cop, but between power that's earned and power that assumes. The courtroom was silent, save for the soft rustle of papers and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. Judge Maya Reynolds sat poised on the bench, her expression unreadable, her posture impeccable. The incident at the courthouse entrance lingered in her mind, but she refused to let it cloud her judgment. She had learned long ago that in the face of prejudice, composure was her most potent weapon. As a black woman in the judiciary, she had faced skepticism and bias, but she met each challenge with unwavering professionalism. The case before her was that of Kevin Bryant, a young black man arrested in his own neighborhood without cause. The charges were flimsy, the evidence scant. Yet the weight of systemic bias threatened to tip the scales against him. Maya's eyes scanned the courtroom. The jury, predominantly white, sat with varying degrees of attentiveness. The prosecution appeared confident, the defense resolute. Kevin sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the floor, a picture of apprehension. She recalled the words of civil rights advocates who had long decried the racial disparities in the justice system. Studies had shown that black defendants often faced harsher sentences and were more likely to be wrongfully convicted. The courtroom was not immune to the biases that permeated society. Maya took a deep breath, centering herself. She would not allow the morning's events to influence her conduct. Her role was to ensure a fair trial and to uphold the principles of justice. "Counsel, are you ready to proceed?" she asked, her voice steady. The attorneys nodded, and the proceedings commenced. Throughout the trial, Maya maintained her composure. She listened attentively, interjected when necessary, and ensured that both sides adhered to the rules of the court. Her demeanor set the tone for the courtroom, commanding respect and order. As the prosecution presented its case, Maya noted the reliance on circumstantial evidence and the absence of concrete proof. The defense highlighted inconsistencies and the lack of probable cause for Kevin's arrest. Maya's thoughts drifted to the broader implications of the case. It was not just about Kevin, it was about challenging the systemic issues that allowed such cases to arise. She was reminded of the importance of trauma-informed representation and the need to address the underlying factors that led to such encounters with the justice system. As the day progressed, Maya remained a pillar of impartiality. She knew that any display of emotion could be misconstrued, used to question her objectivity. So, she channeled her feelings into a steadfast commitment to justice. When the court adjourned for the day, Maya retreated to her chambers. Alone, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The challenges she faced were not new, but they were no less taxing. Yet she remained resolute in her mission. The storm of bias and discrimination raged on, but Maya Reynolds stood firm, a beacon of integrity in the tempest. She would continue to wield her gavel with wisdom and fairness, undeterred by the forces that sought to undermine her. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted as the bailiff announced, "Next witness, Officer Colin Hurst." Judge Maya Reynolds felt a jolt. The same officer who had detained her that morning now stood to testify in the case of Kevin Bryant, the young black man arrested in his own neighborhood. Maya's mind raced. She had maintained her composure earlier, but now the challenge intensified. She couldn't let personal affront cloud her judgment. The integrity of the courtroom depended on her impartiality. Officer Hurst approached the stand, his demeanor confident. He recounted the events leading to Kevin's arrest, describing a suspicious individual matching a vague description. His testimony was methodical, but Maya noted inconsistencies. She listened intently, her face a mask of neutrality. Inside, she grappled with the irony. The officer who had questioned her legitimacy now positioned himself as a credible witness. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination. "Officer Hurst," he began, "can you clarify the description of the suspect you were pursuing?" Hurst hesitated. "Male, dark clothing, approximately 6 feet tall. Any specific facial features? Distinctive marks?" "No, nothing specific." The attorney pressed on, highlighting the vagueness of the description and the lack of concrete evidence linking Kevin to any crime. Maya observed the proceedings, her thoughts returning to the morning's encounter. She recalled Hurst's dismissive tone and his refusal to acknowledge her authority. Now he sought the court's trust. She reminded herself of her duty. Personal feelings had no place on the bench. Her role was to ensure justice and to weigh the evidence impartially. As the cross-examination concluded, Maya addressed the courtroom. "Thank you, Officer Hurst. You may step down." He nodded, avoiding her gaze, and exited the stand. Maya called for a brief recess, retreating to her chambers. Alone, she allowed herself a moment to process the morning's events and the testimony she had just heard. The intersection of personal experience and professional responsibility weighed heavily on her. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the remainder of the trial. The pursuit of justice demanded resilience, and she was determined to uphold it. The courtroom was tense, every seat occupied, the air thick with anticipation. Judge Maya Reynolds sat poised on the bench, her expression unreadable, as Prosecutor Angela Perez approached the jury. Perez, a seasoned attorney known for her unwavering commitment to justice, began her closing argument. "Ladies and gentlemen," she started, her voice steady, "this case is not just about Kevin Bryant. It's about a system that allows racial profiling to persist, unchecked and unchallenged." She paused, letting her words sink in. Kevin was arrested in his own neighborhood, without cause, without evidence. Why? Because he fit a vague description. Because he was a young black man in the wrong place at the wrong time. Perez's words resonated beyond the courtroom walls. News outlets picked up the story, and soon, the case became a focal point in the national conversation about racial profiling and systemic bias in law enforcement. Judge Reynolds, watching the media coverage, felt a mix of emotions. She was proud that the case was shedding light on these critical issues, but she also felt the weight of responsibility. The trial had become more than a legal proceeding. It was a symbol of a broader struggle for justice. As the jury deliberated, protests erupted across the state. People demanded accountability, not just for Kevin Bryant, but for all those who had been unjustly targeted. The trial had ignited a movement, and the eyes of the nation were on Baton Rouge. When the verdict was finally read, not guilty, a collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom. Kevin's family embraced, tears streaming down their faces. Outside, cheers erupted from the gathered crowd. Judge Reynolds remained composed, but inside she felt a profound sense of hope. Perhaps this case would be a turning point, a catalyst for change. In the days that followed, the conversation continued. Lawmakers proposed new legislation to address racial profiling. Community leaders organized forums to discuss police reform. The trial had sparked a movement, and the momentum showed no signs of slowing. For Judge Reynolds, the case reaffirmed her belief in the power of the legal system to effect change. But it also reminded her of the work that still needed to be done. The fight for justice was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt that progress was possible. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Judge Maya Reynolds sat high on the bench, her gaze steady as the jury filed back into the room. The foreperson stood, holding the verdict in trembling hands. We, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Colin Hurst, guilty of false arrest and racial discrimination. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Hurst, standing at the defense table, closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, his face pale. Judge Reynolds nodded solemnly. Thank you, jurors, for your service. As the jurors exited, Hurst requested to address the court. Judge Reynolds considered for a moment, then granted permission. Hurst stood, his uniform crisp, but his demeanor subdued. He cleared his throat, his voice wavering. Your Honor, I want to apologize to Mr. Bryant, to this court, and to you. I didn't recognize my bias. I thought I was doing my job, but I see now that I was wrong. Judge Reynolds met his gaze, her expression unreadable. After a pause, she spoke, her voice firm. An apology cannot fix a broken system, Officer Hurst, but acknowledgement is a step toward change. The courtroom remained silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone present. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, awaiting the verdict. When news of the conviction spread, cheers erupted. Signs bearing messages like "Justice for Kevin" and "End racial profiling" waved in the air. Kevin Bryant, standing beside his attorney, addressed the media. I hope this verdict sends a message. We need accountability. We need change. The case garnered national attention, sparking discussions about systemic racism in law enforcement. Advocacy groups called for reforms, citing the trial as a pivotal moment in the fight for justice. Judge Reynolds, reflecting on the proceedings, knew that while the verdict was a step forward, the journey toward true equality was far from over. But at that moment, justice was served. The courtroom had emptied, leaving behind an echo of footsteps and whispered conversations. Judge Maya Reynolds sat alone on the bench, her gavel resting silently beside her. The weight of the day's proceedings pressed heavily on her shoulders. A soft knock at the chamber door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Sergeant Marcus Bell entering, his uniform crisp, his expression solemn. Judge Reynolds, he began, his voice steady, I wanted to speak with you before you left. She gestured for him to sit. Of course, Sergeant, please. They sat in silence for a moment, the gravity of the day's events hanging between them. Today was significant, Bell said finally. The conviction of Officer Hurst sends a message. Maya nodded slowly. It does. But it's just one case, one verdict. Bell leaned forward, his gaze earnest. Change doesn't happen overnight. But it's happening. Little by little, we're making progress. She looked at him, her eyes weary. I want to believe that. I really do. But sometimes it's hard to see the light through the darkness. He offered a small smile. Hope isn't always easy to find. But it's there, in moments like this, in people like you. Maya sighed, the weight of her responsibilities evident. I still don't see hope, but today could be a start. They sat in contemplative silence, the enormity of their roles in the justice system clear. Outside, the world continued on, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place within these walls. As Sergeant Bell stood to leave, he turned to her. We're changing from the inside, Judge, little by little. She met his gaze, a flicker of determination in her eyes. Then let's keep pushing forward. The courtroom had long since emptied, but its echoes lingered. Judge Maya Reynolds stood alone, the weight of the trial's conclusion pressing heavily upon her. The conviction of Officer Colin Hurst for false arrest and racial discrimination marked a significant moment, yet Maya knew it was but a single step in a much longer journey toward justice. As she gathered her belongings, a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Turning, she saw Kevin Bryant standing hesitantly at the doorway. Judge Reynolds, he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. She offered a gentle smile. Mr. Bryant, please come in. He approached, extending his hand. I wanted to thank you, not just for presiding over the trial, but for seeing me, for seeing all of us. Maya shook his hand firmly. Justice is not about seeing one person. It's about acknowledging the humanity in everyone. Kevin nodded. You didn't just judge me. You judged a system that has failed so many. They shared a moment of understanding before Kevin took his leave. Maya watched him go, the weight of his words settling over her. Exiting through the side door, Maya stepped into the cool evening air. The city buzzed with life, unaware of the quiet revolution that had just taken place within the courthouse walls. As she made her way down the steps, she spotted Officer Hurst standing alone, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on the ground. Gone was the arrogance. In its place stood a man confronted by the consequences of his actions. Their eyes met, and for a moment, silence hung between them. Judge Reynolds, Hurst began, his voice subdued. She approached, her gaze unwavering. I never realized. He trailed off, searching for words. Maya interrupted gently. Understanding one's bias is the first step toward change. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry. She held his gaze. An apology can't fix a broken system, Officer Hurst, but acknowledging the problem is a start. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Hurst to contemplate the path ahead. As Maya disappeared into the night, a voice echoed in her mind, a reminder of the journey still to come. Justice does not begin with the bang of a gavel, but with a look that does not turn away when you see injustice.